Hello class, so this is going to be our last official lecture for this class. Um, and basically I wanted the chapters or the readings for this week to somewhat recapture things that you've learned throughout the semester, especially all the behavior change theories that we covered early on. Um, but I also wanted to highlight this week with the behaviors that you will be focusing on for your final projects. So you'll either be focusing on health promoting behaviors like exercise or healthy eating or wearing seatbelts, or you'll be focusing your efforts on modifying risk behaviors such as smoking, drinking, um, unsafe sex practices like lack of condom use or multiple sexual partners, or a variety of other risk behaviors that we know can be detrimental to health. So I just kind of wanted to bring you back in and help you focus so that you can be well aligned to carry out your final project. And I'll be providing a lecture or a little video talking about the final project later today. What else did I want to tell you about this? There was something else there, but it'll come back to me in a little bit. Okay? All right, so let's move on with our lecture. Oh yeah, I know what I wanted to tell you. So for your final project, I wanted to make sure that you focus on a very specific behavior. So I know there's this tendency to focus on categories of behaviors like unsafe sexual practices or drug abuse, which is a whole gambit of behaviors, right? Because one can use different drugs with different degrees that impose different degrees of harm. Um, some folks focus on healthy eating, and it's like, well, that's also a whole range of behaviors. Um, so for your final project, make sure you're focusing on a specific category of behavior, because that'll be more effective. You'll be more effective in designing strategies to target that specific behavior, because each specific behavior can be influenced by a variety of contexts or social influences or personal experiences. And so it's really important that the more specific you are, the better. Okay? All right. Okay, so let's move forward with our lecture. Okay, so just a quick recap of what health promoting behaviors are just basically those that positively influence health. And here we have a whole list of them, but there's many, many more. And that's a good thing, to engage in health promoting behavior. Any movement toward engaging in health promoting behavior or actual increase in these behaviors is a very good thing for our health outcomes. So these two chapters focus on the social cognition models, which are basically the behavior change theories that we've been discussing in this class to date. And so basically think of the words social and cognition. So social are all those things in our social environment that can influence our behavior. And cognition is basically everything that's going on in the person's noggin, right? In inside their head. The way they're perceiving the world, the way they're perceiving things that influence their behavior, or how they think about their behavior, what they feel about the behavior, right? So everything that we process cognitively is part of these models, right? And so they define it as the thoughts and feelings associated with performing a certain behavior. And these refer to all those theory relevant constructs that we've been talking about in this class, right? So attitudes, perceived severity, self-efficacy. It's all how we feel and think toward a specific behavior. And those are the things that folks feel they can modify, that researchers feel they can modify. Because although there might be bigger greater social determinants of behavior and of health, many times those bigger things influencing behavior and health are difficult to modify. So the textbook talked about socioeconomic status and how that's a major influence, right, toward engagement in either health promoting behaviors or risk behaviors, right? It's like if we are poor and we live in communities lacking resources or that have possibly high crime rates or other environmental influences on our behavior, that might prevent us from engaging in healthy behaviors or in engaging in health promoting behaviors. But again, it involves political actions, major changes in legislature, and things that are a little bit harder, okay, a lot harder to move along or modify. And so the textbook focuses on those things that researchers feel can be modified, that social psychologists think can be modified, right? A lot of the theories are based on social psychology. Um, So basically, the things that mediate between the socioeconomic status of an individual and their specific behaviors, and that being the cognitions, the social cognitions that they experience. Again, they have to be modifiable. So when targeting something for your intervention, make sure that it's something modifiable. So through the efforts that we are discussing in this class, that's not saying that certain conditions can't be modified, but your effort has to be directed toward one, a behavior, and a behavior that can be modified. Okay. All right. So behavior. I think people are still struggling a little bit with what is considered a behavior versus what is considered a health condition or a health outcome. So just to be clear, something like obesity is a health outcome. Something like a mental health condition is a health outcome. Um, Although there's behaviors that can contribute toward obesity, mental health condition is many times chemical condition in the brain that is difficult to modify, or that has the brain has been impacted by trauma, um, that it's modified um, in such a way that perhaps we cannot influence with some of these behavior change techniques that we are covering in this class. Okay? So try to think about those things that can be modified. So can we engage a person in seeking out healthcare? Can we, that's a behavior, right? The seeking out of healthcare is a behavior. Can we modify behavior to encourage people to seek out mental health care? And that's a big one, right? Because lots of people don't want to engage in mental health services, or don't trust them, or don't feel that they're culturally relevant, or they can't afford them, right? Which the socioeconomic status, again, comes into play there. Um, Regarding obesity, what are the things that can contribute to obesity? There's many behaviors, correct? We know that physical activity is a contributor. We know, and there's different types of physical activity, right? So if we're talking about moderate to rigorous physical activity, or strength building physical activity, or I guess activity that helps one become more flexible. I mean, there's all sorts of activities that we can focus on. What else affects obesity? Other behaviors, our diet, of course. So again, diet's a very big category of behaviors. And so are we talking about increasing fruit and vegetable consumption? Are we talking about eating a low carb or a low fat diet? Are we talking about an intermittent meal diet? It's like, so making sure that we operationalize or define the very specific behavior that we're going to be focusing on and ultimately measuring to see if we had an effect, right? Those things are really important. Sleep behavior, we know, may be a contributor to obesity. So are people maintaining good sleep patterns? What else contributes to obesity? Stress, right? And the influence of that. But stress itself is not a behavior. But we can engage people in stress relieving behaviors, right? So that can be the focus of an intervention. So I just want to direct you to make sure that you're focusing on a behavior and also on a very specific behavior within your final project, one that you can target very clearly with all these social cognition constructs, these theory relevant constructs in your intervention. Let's see. So again, the most popular social cognition model is the health belief model. I think almost everyone in this class focused on the health belief model for their intervention, for the public service announcements, which I found very entertaining. And so I thought this is the first time we do that assignment in this class. And so I thought you all pulled it off pretty well. The theory of recent action and the theory of planned behavior is another really, really popular one of the social cognition models, and of course, social cognitive theory. Okay, so I hope you can see this, but I provided you with the PowerPoint separately in your Canvas page for this in the learning module within Canvas for this class. So that you can magnify it. I can see it pretty clear on my screen. I know it's coming up kind of small here. But here we map out all the different theories that, or especially the most popular theories that have been studied. And I tried to map them out in a way that where the constructs that appear to be similar across the different theories are aligned in a specific row. Okay, so we start here with what type of evaluation is occurring, what cognitive evaluation is occurring in the individual that influences behavior. And so they basically had three major categories. One is evaluation of the illness. Second is the evaluation of the behaviors we need to counteract the threat or the harm in our environment, or that's going to, I think I should modify that, or evaluation of behaviors that can contribute to our health as well, right? And then we have an evaluation of social structural factors that can impact the behavior. So basically our perceptions of the environment, whether it be our social environment or our social or our physical environment. And then at the end, I just provided the summary that they gave us regarding the best predictors of behavior change. Okay, so we have the health belief model, and then they listed the protection motivation theory, which is an extension of the health belief model. Then we have the theory of planned behavior, which is an extension of the theory of recent action. And then we have the recent action approach, which is, again, an extension of the theory of planned behavior. And then we have social cognitive theory. And so, so within the health belief model and the theory, the protection motivation theory, both of these include an evaluation of the illness, right? Am I susceptible to that illness or condition? And how severe is that condition if I were to acquire it, right? The other theories do not incorporate that kind of evaluation of the disease. They are more focused on evaluation of the behaviors, right? Whether it's behaviors that help to counteract threatening health outcomes or that help promote good outcomes, right? That help promote health. And so we see that almost all the theories in some way evaluate attitudes or some kind of judgment as to whether something is good or bad, right? So we have the perceived benefits of performing of the behavior. It's like, is something good going to happen if I perform this behavior? The response efficacy is, as it's called in the protection motivation theory, which is an evaluation of, will the behavior remove the threat, right? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Is it going to help me? In the theory of planned behavior, we have attitudes toward the behavior. So again, these are based on outcome expectancies. Is the behavior, if I perform this behavior, what will be the outcome? And is that outcome a good thing or a bad thing, right? It's basically, all of that is captured in attitudes. And in the recent action approach, we also have attitudes, and some are affective in nature. So will performing the behavior make me happy, make me feel good, make me sad, make me grumpy, whatever the case, right? However the person evaluates how they're going to feel after performing the behavior. And then also, or during the behavior, right? Because sometimes it's like we're grumpy as we're having to exercise or do something that we don't really want to do. Or maybe we really love exercise and it's like we look forward to it. It makes us feel happy ahead of time, during, and even afterwards. Let's see, the recent, and then they have the instrumental attitude. And so that's more of an evaluation of the benefits. Like, this, is exercising going to help me lose weight? Is exercise going to help me stay strong and be able to sustain myself so I can protect myself and carry out my daily activities of living if I'm an older person, right? So you can see how both effective and instrumental attitudes were distinguished in this extended version of the theory of planned behavior. And then in social cognitive theory, they also focus on outcome expectancies. Again, that's the value we put on the outcomes associated with the behavior, right? It's the same thing. So you can see the parallels across the different theories. And I thought this was a really nice layout of all the theories, because they do have a lot in common. And even though the conceptually they're kind of targeting the same thoughts and beliefs, they're just calling them different names, right? Which are their specific constructs within the theory. Okay, so moving on to the next, there's two that cover the costs or the barriers to performing the behavior, right? So if I do this, what am I gonna have to give up? What's it gonna cost me to have to perform this behavior, right? And so you can see that the health belief model, that is something that is clearly evaluated in the health belief model and in the extension of the health belief model, but we don't see an equivalent of that in the other theories. Self-efficacy, right? I don't think there's a theory that doesn't focus on self-efficacy as an essential component of changing behavior. If we do not feel confident that we can carry out a behavior, it is not likely we're going to carry out that behavior, right? The lack of confidence reduces the probability we'll engage in a behavior. So we see self-efficacy is in the health belief model and its extended version. Where is it? Sorry, here, self-efficacy. The theory of planned behavior calls it somewhat a different name. It has a different construct. Some people believe that perceived behavioral control is an equivalent to self-efficacy, and others distinguish it from self-efficacy. But it basically boils down to, do I feel that I have control of my behavior, right? Do I have control? Am I able to carry out this behavior? And for this, the individual is weighing both internal factors and also external factors that influence the behavior. The reason action approach actually lists both of the constructs of self-efficacy and perceived behavioral control, because they probably are highly correlated, right? If you measure one in an individual and measure the other one, they're probably going to be strongly associated. They might not be identical. And still trying to distinguish between perceived behavioral control and self-efficacy, go back and examine the definitions of those, okay? And then again, social cognitive theory, of course, is a huge proponent of self-efficacy to perform a behavior, right? And I think social cognitive theory really helped to highlight self-efficacy, and I think everybody else followed suit. Okay, cues to action, having cues in the environment that engages in the behavior is really highlighted in the health belief model. I didn't see it listed within the protection motivation theory, but I might be wrong on this one. Since it is an extension of the health belief model, I just didn't see it listed explicitly as a construct here. And then the other theories I don't believe make mention of cues to action. All theories have some measure of motivation, right? So if motivation is the concept, right? The thing that we're trying to capture. It's captured in all of them, because if we have no motivation to engage in the behavior, we're not going to engage in that behavior unless someone is forcing us to do it, right? And because all of these theories are focusing on voluntary behavior, motivation is key, right? And so I don't think there's one that does not have some kind of measure of motivation, whether it's called motivation or behavioral intention or goals. They are all talking about the same concept of motivation. Okay, the fear of a health threat was unique to the protection motivation theory. So I don't think the others talk about fear except for this particular theory. Okay, so some of them focus on evaluation, the person's evaluation of their social structural environment. And so we see that coming out in the theory of planned behavior, right, through subjective norms. And so examining perceived approval or disapproval from salient others and our motivation to comply with those salient others. So if I engage in this behavior, what will my best friends think of me, right? And am I motivated to comply with my best friends? And so you can see something like engaging in binge drinking, right? That peer pressure to engage in behaviors like that. And, it's like one might think my friends will disapprove if I don't do this, but how strong am I within myself to feel the need to comply with my friends? Okay, and people vary along those lines quite a bit. The recent action approach, which is an extension of the theory of planned behavior, introduced, in addition to injunctive norms, they also introduced descriptive norms. And this is basically, what do I think others like myself are doing? What does the individual think that the majority of people like themselves are doing in regard to this particular behavior of interest, right? So it's also the injunctive norms, which refers to this definition of perceived approval, disapproval from salient others. That is what is referred to as injunctive norms. And then we have the descriptive norms. What are people around me doing? What are those people like myself doing? And then social cognitive theory talks about impediments or opportunities to engage in a behavior, and those are environmental as well. And sometimes they're social, and sometimes they're physical. Okay, so I want to throw that in here, even though they might not necessarily be social impediments or opportunities. It is inclusive of that as well. So I threw it in there. Okay, the best predictors of behavior change when they've done meta-analysis or literature reviews, trying to summarize similar studies to see which constructs within each theory had the best predictive ability of behavioral outcomes. And so within the health belief model, there's a lot of support for self-efficacy as a strong predictor of behavior change. And then also perceived susceptibility. So a person has to perceive that they are susceptible to unhealthy outcomes, right? And they perceive barriers also. Perceived barriers to carrying out the behavior are also a strong predictor. And again, always look at the word perceived barriers. So it doesn't matter what the reality of the situation is. What matters is what the person is thinking. Am I perceiving a barrier, right? That's going to define whether I engage in the behavior or not. Okay. All right. Within the protection motivation theory, again, not a surprise, self-efficacy, behavioral intentions. So protection motivation had a measure of behavioral intention, and they found that was a strong predictor of behavior, which is not surprising, right? Because motivation is key to engaging in behavior. We also know that intentions are, when we're not able to measure behavior, that scientists think that's a good proxy of behavioral outcomes, although the research is kind of fuzzy on that. And then some of the other constructs also predicted, but again, they stated that it depended on the type of behavior as to which of the other constructs were effective in predicting. Excuse me. Regarding the theory of planned behavior, again, they stated it depends, right? Model and individual construct effectiveness depends on the behavior. So when looking at the entire model, that means all the constructs in the model and how effectively they work together to predict the behavior. Again, it depended on the specific behavior. And then when they dissected the model and looked at specific constructs to see which constructs were predicting what type of behavior, again, it varied. So it was too big of a summary to try to incorporate here, and I think even within the chapter itself. Within the reason action approach, they say this is a really strong model for predicting behavior, and they stated that this model was actually effective in accounting for about 58.7% of the variance in behavioral intentions. So we can predict with pretty high accuracy, because 58.7% of any behavior, accounting for 58.7% of any behavior is huge in our area of behavior change. Okay, so that's a huge effect. So the model as a whole was effective in predicting behavioral intentions, and also very highly effective in predicting actual behavior at 30.9%. Okay, so big kudos to the recent action approach model. So go take a look at it and see what they have to say about that. Again, in the recent action approach, there's two components to each major construct. So that attitudes has affective and instrumental attitudes. The ability to carry out the behavior has both self-efficacy and perceived behavioral control. Go in and see how that particular theory distinguished between those two constructs, but kind of capturing a similar overall concept. Also norms, right? The subjective norms are broken down into injunctive and descriptive. And so they really talk about how that's important. And then finally, in social cognitive theory, no surprise that self-efficacy is a big predictor of behavior, and also outcome expectancies. Okay, so then they talk a little bit about how to modify some of these constructs. So they don't go into detail for every single construct. I think they try to really highlight just some of the constructs. And so they talked about changing attitudes. Again, that's the positive or negative evaluation of performing the behavior, or positive or negative evaluation of the outcomes associated with performing the behavior. And so they distinguished between two routes to changing attitudes. One is a central or systematic route, and the other one is peripheral or heuristic in nature. And so the central or systematic route really focuses on strong persuasive messaging with lots of evidence, right? But it requires the individual to engage in mental effort to elaborate on what is being said in order to interpret it and absorb the information, right? But such a message typically produces favorable thoughts in relationship to the message, like, oh, that's important. Maybe, it gets our attention. It's more likely to result in behavior change and more important, in stable changes in behavior, right? It's like, oh my goodness, like I didn't know this was such a threat to my health. Like maybe I need to be paying better attention to my behavior. The second route is the peripheral or heuristic route, and this route does not require as much mental effort. It's typically, we are so distracted by so many things in our environment, and so this route is really also can play an important role, but may not lead to quite as stable changes. So it takes a little bit of relatively little effort to process the information, because it's primarily dictated by cues, prompting the use of just very simple cues, right? So experts, you might present an expert, right, or someone that's well respected or very popular in the media to present the message, and because it's a celebrity or a well-known expert, right? Dr. Fauci, for example, it increases the credibility of the message, and also helps to elicit positive reactions toward the behavior. This approach also benefits from numerous arguments, so that if you miss any of the arguments, you might hear some of the latter arguments. And also, it's important that these messages highlight the importance of consensus. Like everybody, who who engages in this behavior, has reported very positive outcomes, or really happy with their outcomes, right? Something to that effect. Let's see, what else did I want to tell you? So this is like perhaps something like an approach, the peripheral or heuristic route is an approach you might want to use when, doing commercials. When people are busy, they're kind of watching TV, but also doing other things. I don't know how many people, so many people in my family cannot sit still and attend to the television. Like they're always doing a million little things, and I'm not like that. I actually like to sit and watch and direct my attention, unless I'm cooking and I just have the TV on in the background for some noise. But to get these people's attention, these types of peripheral messaging are really important, right? Let's see. Okay. Let me see. Okay, so the next construct that they focused on was changing self-efficacy. And so according to Bandura, there are 4 major strategies for enhancing self-efficacy, and that includes mastery experiences. So engaging the person in practicing the behavior and gaining experience in successfully carrying out the behavior, right? So many times this can require graded tasks if it's a difficult behavior to perform, um, or a difficult skill to acquire. And so you give them instructions and baby steps. Okay, let's first figure out how to do this. Okay, now that you've mastered that, let's go on to what else you need to do in order to carry out this behavior, right? So graded tasks until they're able to do each part of the task successfully. And then in the end can do all of the tasks successfully. Okay, vicarious experience. We talked about the role models in the social cognitive theory, right? And observing other people performing the behavior and being rewarded for performing the behavior. So observing others like ourselves or someone we respect is important, and demonstrating how to carry out the behavior. And so we learn how to perform the behavior by watching others. And so role playing is also, this is why role playing is really important, right? Like you yourself are not engaging in the behavior, but you're modeling is really important. You're not engaging in the behavior, you're just watching others perform the behavior and you're learning from them as they're engaging in the behavior. But then the role playing comes into play, and maybe that's part of the mastery experience. Okay, verbal persuasion is also an important strategy. So argue that others with similar skills to them are successful in carrying out the behavior. So many times an individual might feel like, how can I do this? It's like, well, there's other people like you, right? Take that sense of um, inability or negativity away from the individual per se and say, lots of people struggle, but many people, in spite of the struggles, are able to carry out the behavior. And that's really important, right? Changing the perception of physiological and affective states. So people experience arousal and anxiety during performing a behavior, but the goal is to help them reinterpret that anxiety or negativity into something positive, right? And let them know that, yeah, it's demanding, but, one, we believe that you can do it. And even though lots of people struggle, like I said earlier, they are able to master it. And they're people just like you, right? So that way kind of help them reappraise the situation and make it more into a challenge as opposed to a threat or something negative that they are experiencing. Changing behavioral intentions. Let's see, I don't remember what I wrote here. Question, behavior, effect. Oh, okay. So this is a strategy called the question, behavior, effect, and it involves merely asking questions about a behavior to just help prime the person to motivate them to change that behavior, right, or a similar behavior. So like the example in the textbook is, do you intend to eat a low-fat diet, right? Just if you're working with someone, just asking that question might increase engagement in a low-fat diet, participating in a low-fat diet, or in another type of healthy diet, right? So, I mean, this happens to us when we're conducting our research. And when we ask people, how much do you drink? And, what are ways that you can reduce the amount you can drink? Just those type of questions can prompt people to think about how they can do those behaviors. Okay. Questions about behavioral intentions heighten access attitudes toward the behavior. Questions about behavioral intentions. What is your intention regarding this specific behavior? This will help heighten access to attitudes toward the behavior. I think I was missing a word. access to one's attitudes towards the behavior. So when you ask a question like that, like what is your intention? Do you intend to exercise in the coming week? Um, it'll prime a person to think about their attitudes toward that behavior. So if the attitudes are positive to the behavior, this question behavior effect is likely to increase the behavior. So if I actually really enjoy exercising, I feel good when I exercise, I feel happy, um, um, but I haven't done it in a while, you ask me that question, I'm more likely to engage in the behavior subsequently to that type of questioning. However, if my attitudes are negative toward exercising, like I really hate it and I'm tired and I don't have time and my body hurts while I'm doing it and it's so hard because I can't keep up with the exercise even when the instructor, is like trying to show me. And so that person would have negative attitudes toward the behavior. So if I ask that person, do you intend to exercise in the coming week, as a prompt, that question might actually decrease my engagement in that behavior according to this extended version or expansion on the question behavior effect. Okay, another approach to changing intentions is to use implementation intentions, or what they call if-then plans, right? So you want to identify a behavior that will lead to a goal. So the behavior is to exercise 50 minutes weekly so that I can lose some weight, right? I want to lose some weight. I know I need to exercise. So the behavior, my goal is to exercise 50 minutes each weekday. And so this is really, really important when trying to change risk behaviors, this approach, right, to identify a behavior that will lead to a goal is particularly important when you're trying to change a risk behavior, such as you might want to help the individual identify an alternative behavior that will replace the risky behavior, right? That'll be the goal. So that'll be the strategy to reduce the risk behavior. So I just realized I'm missing the word there. Then that's step one, right? To identify a behavioral goal to meet your overall outcome goal, your health outcome goal. And then two is to identify a suitable opportunity to initiate that behavior. So my opportunity to exercise for 50 minutes a weekday is at 5 a.m., right before I shower and before I go to work, right? And for me, that's my opportunity to engage in exercise. So this is also, this particular step in the if-then plan is really important when trying to change health protective behaviors. So making that very specific plan of when, where, what will I do the behavior, right, is more important when focusing on changing the health promoting behavior like exercise. Okay, and it's important in these if-then plans to incorporate environmental cues. So, if I'm going to start exercising, I'm going to set my workout clothes in a place that's very visible. So first thing I get up at 5 in the morning, when I go into the bathroom, my workout clothes is going to be ready for me to change into and get ready to go and exercise. But you can also put calendar notifications. So I put a little alarm in my calendar to wake me up at 5 so I can exercise. So this helps to pass the control of intention enactment to the environment, right? It's the environment that's cueing you to engage in the behavior. They also talked about collaborative implementation intentions, so that two or more people make this if-then plans together. And they show that these collaborative implementation intentions are more effective than just having a support system or someone saying, yeah, I'll take care of the kids while you go exercise. Like, you're still doing it on your own. But if there's someone's made the same plan that you have to engage in the behavior, then that's very, very effective to changing one's intentions toward the behavior, one's motivation toward the behavior. Okay, so then they switched over into chapter 8 into the health risk behaviors. And again, these are behaviors that negatively influence health outcomes, right? So enough said. All right, so this book covered it a little, this chapter covered things a little bit different. So I think I like the one on health promoting behaviors a little bit better because it gave very clear strategies. But this one was a little bit all over the place, like someone different wrote it. So they talked about the theory of planned behavior using the TPB to change risk behaviors. And the major focus was on norms. So they say that norms are really strong predictors of risk behaviors than they are of health promoting behaviors. So that norms are particularly, subjective norms are particularly important in targeting norms when trying to change risk behaviors. Okay, and it's also true in trying to predict behavioral intentions or promoting motivation to engage in or to reduce the risk behavior. So it's the same pattern, right? So subjective norms are better at predicting behavioral intentions and actual behavior of risk behaviors than in predicting behavioral intentions and actual behaviors of health promoting behaviors. Okay, so the subjective norms play a bigger role in engaging or modifying engagement and risk behaviors. Perceived behavioral control, they reported that it was a weak predictor of risk behaviors. It's a weaker predictor of risk behaviors than it is of health promoting behaviors. So perceived behavioral control is better to influence or more effective in changing health promoting behaviors than in modifying or reducing risk behaviors. So the expanded theory, the reason action approach reported on attitudes. And so remember that they broke attitudes into two types. There's those affective attitudes. How does the behavior make me feel emotionally, right? Like I feel really happy when I know I'm going to be out drinking with my friends. I know I'm going to feel more relaxed. I'm going to feel happy and relaxed and calm when I smoke my cigarette, right? So you can think of affective attitudes that way. Or instrumental attitudes like, okay, drinking alcohol was going to help me what? Survive a stressful situation, maybe something like that. Okay. And then norms, they also broke it into injunctive, what are important others think I should be doing in regard to this behavior, such as drinking alcohol, and also the descriptive norms, what are other people like myself doing. So both attitudes and norms are more strongly related to risk behaviors than to health promoting behaviors. Okay, so that's pretty interesting. Okay, so when you're focusing on risk behaviors, looking at both those affective and instrumental attitudes and the descriptive and injunctive norms are really important to try to target when trying to modify a risk behavior. They talked about the prototype willingness model. So it's used, it focuses mainly on risk behavior or risk-taking among adolescents. And it really highlights that adolescents engage in risk behaviors many times in response to their social situation. So that risk behaviors in young people are not premeditated, not the way the theory of planned behavior would suggest, right? They're not intended, they're not planned. Um, they're typically performed with or in the presence of others, so there's some kind of peer pressure, right, or peer influence to engage in the behavior. And so uh, this peer pressure results as it's associated with a social comparison process that impacts engagement in the risk behavior. So that if I engage in this behavior, what will others think of me? Will I be considered popular or fun or a deadbeat or a nerd or whatever the case, right? So it's affected by the potential social implications of the behavior, the impact on one's social image, right? So we want to come off as something desirable and not something undesirable, and that's going to influence whether we engage in the behavior or not. They talk about the social reaction pathway to engage in risk behaviors, which is part of this prototype willingness model, the PWM. And so they talk about subjective norms being very important, just like we were talking about right now, that the social environment really influences the individual to engage in the behavior. Attitudes, regarding attitudes, they attempt, the person's attitudes try to minimize the negative impact of engaging in the behavior. Past engagement and risk behavior also plays a big role, so that if we've engaged in risky behavior in the past, we're more likely to engage in risky behavior in the future. And many times because our past risky behavior kind of helped us obtain some kind of street cred and makes us more willing to repeat that behavior as a result, okay? And then if we have a positive prototype of the risk behavior, if I think that people who smoke look really cool, or people who binge drink are really fun and popular, then I'm more likely to engage in that behavior, right? Especially as a young adolescent or a young adult. Also, if the prototype of people performing the risk behavior are people like myself, I'm also more likely to engage in that risk behavior, okay? So these are pathways to engaging in risk behavior as defined by the prototype willingness model. Then they talk about expectancies, the expectancy value theory and the subjective expected utility theory. So remember, expectancies are those positive or negative evaluations of the specific outcomes associated with engaging in the behavior. And so people prefer behaviors with the highest expected utilities. So people will evaluate positively behaviors that, I think I wrote that wrong. People prefer behavior with the highest expected utility, so low cost and high benefits, right? So I just reversed that and I'll correct it right now in the slide. Okay. Let's see. The dimensions of outcome expectancies, you can see that in figure 2 on page 182, and they have a 2 by 2 by 2 health belief structure. And so they have the positive and negative valence, right, is a 2 point. It's either positive or negative. Whether it's effective or instrumental is also another key. And then the temporal proximity of the outcome, whether it's proximal or distal, right? So regarding the positive or negative valence of performing the behavior, alcohol makes me feel social, so that's good, right? Or alcohol gives me migraines, which would be bad, right? It would give me a negative expectancy of that behavior. Effective versus instrumental. Again, kind of attitudes. Uh, Exercise is fun versus instrumental. Exercise helps me to feel less depressed, right? And then temporal proximity, where you live in a world of immediate gratification. So the ability for someone to be able to appreciate, have an appreciation for more distal outcomes, such as weight loss, versus something more proximal. Just what would be something more proximal? Feeling immediate relaxation, right? Um, would be proximal in relation to a behavior. Okay, and then they talked about affect and risk behaviors. So they go back to visit the affective attitudes um, that we see in oh my God, reactive. I'm blanking on it. Let me see. Let me go back. Sorry. Let me go back to our table. I'm blanking on the name. The reason action approach. I'm sorry. So the reason action approach. Let me go back to the slide, which I hope you can still see. The reason action approach talked about effective attitudes, and basically this is the affect that we expect to occur while performing the behavior, during the performance of the behavior, and the focus on hedonic, pleasurable emotions, enjoyment, excitement. Um, and research focusing on positive affect finds that affective attitudes were stronger predictors of intentions and behaviors than cognitive attitudes for predicting risk behaviors. Okay, so affective attitudes toward the risk behavior is more likely to predict engagement in the risk behavior or intentions to engage in the risk behavior, right? So that makes sense, right? If we expect some to feel good, we're more likely to be motivated to engage in that behavior or to actually engage in the behavior. So it's very logical. The anticipated affect is another one. So this is not during the performance of behavior, but really it's the expected affect after performing or not performing the behavior. So this can be, again, positive or negative. So perhaps if I exercise, I know that I'm going to feel better, right? I'm going to feel good about myself, one, because I did it, and also just naturally exercise helps to influence mood, and it affects my chemistry, and it makes me feel overall more positive. Or not performing the behavior. So how am I going to feel if I don't perform my exercise, my daily exercise? Am I going to feel guilty? Am I going to feel bad? And I'm going to feel really mad at myself because I'm still gaining weight and I'm not exercising. So this is a focus on self-conscious emotions, right? So one of your chapters talked about conscientiousness. And so this is the fear that you're going to be regretful or feel guilty if you don't perform a behavior, right? Or perhaps you'll regret or feel guilt if you perform the behavior, right? So research focuses on negative affect associated with non-performance of behavior. So anticipated affect, there's a lot of research that focuses on not performing behaviors. So probably not performing behaviors, many times desirable or health promoting behaviors. So the finding is that negative affect with non-performing of the behavior is the anticipated affect of not performing the behavior is strongly helps to predict behaviors. Okay, anticipated regret strongly predicts behavioral intentions and moderately predicts behaviors, whether it be not engaging in drinking or anticipated regret of not perform after performing or not performing the behavior. But most of the research was with non-performance of a behavior. So I can imagine that most of that research is with not performing health-promoting behaviors. So most of the anticipated affect research is with not performing desirable behaviors, and often, that results in regret and guilt. Whereas research on affective attitudes tends to be more focused on positive affect and how affective attitudes that are positive predict intentions and behaviors. Unfortunately, predicts intentions and behaviors for risk behaviors. We've talked about stress. We've covered stress in the past, and again, they define it as an aversive stage in which the well-being of the organism is threatened. And if we think back to Lazarus and the way he defined the stress encounter as the environmental demands exceeding one's ability to cope with those demands. And so we know that stress is detrimental to health, and it tends to be associated with higher engagement and risk behaviors. So we know that the research is showing that. And so stress, the research has shown that stress increases consumption of less healthy, palatable, and energy-dense foods. So lots of research on how stress is associated with unhealthy eating. Typically increases in sugary foods, increases in fast food consumption, and well, mainly those things, right? And how these things contribute to cardiovascular disease and cancer. Then they went to focus on implicit influences and how how implicit attitudes tend to influence our risk behaviors. And so they briefly described the reflective impulsive model, which consists of two interacting systems, the reflective system and the impulsive system. And so the reflective system is very recent, well-reasoned, conscious, and intentional. It's reflected in many of the models described in this class, right? So many of the models assume that we are going through very well thought out perceptions. We think through and evaluate our environment and how we're feeling about things through reason and conscious efforts. But this one suggests that there's also an impulsive system where we have learned associations that have been reinforced over a long, long time, right? Through many, many experiences. And these learned associations trigger behaviors, many times risk behaviors, in response to the simplest of stimuli. So there's an intentional bias for these. Once we have a paired association, it's likely to trigger our attention to that behavior, to want to engage in that behavior. So these implicit attitudes may be very automatic, so that they're positive or negative evaluations toward a behavior and their potential outcomes. So I forgot what this is about. Let's see. They talk about persuasive messages for changing health risk behaviors. They focus on message framing, self-affirmation theory, and the social norms approach to changing health risk behaviors. And regarding message framing, Prospect theory suggests that one should make the individual consider the health gains in order to avoid risk, and also to help consider health losses um, to preference for risk. Okay, so people consider health gains in order to help avoid risk, and when people consider the losses associated with engaging in the behavior, they're going to have an increase in risk behavior. Okay, so think about what you want to emphasize in your messaging. Do you want to emphasize the gains that they're going to get by not engaging in that risk behavior? Or do you want to focus on what's going to be detrimental, what they're going to lose if they continue engaging in that risk behavior? Okay, but the research is showing that it's better to emphasize or make people think about the health gains in order to help reduce engagement in risk behaviors. Okay. Extended theory focuses on the influence of gain and loss framed messages. Um, oh, Extended theory of this suggests that the influence of gain and loss framed messages is contingent on the perceived function of the health behavior, the associated risk with the behavior. So for example, message framing promoting consideration of losses increases detection behaviors, um, is their idea. So if your message framing is focusing on losses, they believe that it's going to increase detection behaviors like screening behaviors, right? Cancer screening, for example. And they suggest that message framing promoting consideration of gains um, leads to increased promotion, risk behaviors. So, and this is supported by the research. Okay, so message framing promoting the gains of engaging in the behavior, increased promotion and risk behaviors. Okay. So the gain, if you highlight the gains of the health promotion behavior, they are more likely to engage in that behavior. But it's equally true for risk behaviors. If a person is focused or considering the gains of engaging in the risk behavior, they are also more likely to engage in that risk behavior. Okay. So message framing focusing on losses doesn't have good research evidence behind it, right? So, okay, let's move on to self-affirmation theory. And this focuses on reflecting on one's cherished values, actions, or attributes as an individual, right? It's what defines our sense of self-integrity. And people are motivated to maintain their self-integrity as to what they think defines them and makes them good people or valuable people. So health messages can be perceived as threatening to one's self-integrity, and this is really important not to do that, to be careful not to do that. So the messaging should affirm sources of self-worth, factors that contribute to one's self-integrity. Okay, so instead of focusing on smoking, that's bad, right? Even though it's something I really like to do, you might focus on my strengths as a parent and wanting to stay healthy for my children, right? I like parenting role is very important for me, and that's maybe something you want to highlight and show me as the protector of my children and wanting to be there to stay their protector by avoiding smoking. Okay. And then the third approach was the social norms approach. And this was, they really focus on social norms as having a strong influence on behavior and how it's important to correct exaggerated subjective norms, right? And make sure to correct misperceptions of social norms in people. So if people think everybody eats unhealthy, everybody smokes, everybody drinks, well, that's just not true, right? And we need to correct those perceptions in people, and that'll help engage them in reducing their risk behavior. Okay, they went on and provided a few more tips in the book, and you can focus on that. But for now, I think that's all I want to cover on the lecture. I'm not covering the third chapter that we read in class for this week, but I did want you to review how they go about measuring behavior, because I think by understanding how behavior is measured, it'll help you help you kind of determine whether you're actually engaging in a behavior intervention and not a health outcome intervention. Okay, so I just wanted to have you take a look at that. I would not review that for your exam. So that was just to kind of expose you a little bit. We'll be covering research methods in great detail next semester. And I just wanted to expose you to that a little bit. Okay, so again, what chapter was it? I can't remember now. Let me look real quick. Pile. Okay, so it was Chapter 5 on the methodology of health behavior change will not be covered on your exam. Okay, so don't worry about summarizing that. I have put the review questions already for chapter 7 and 8. Okay, so that's it for today's lecture. And be on the lookout for that other description of the final project that I will be posting in a little bit. Okay, thank you.